Hey, my friends, it's Matt Whitman from the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. You know that you're listening to it right now. It's nice to have you here. Thank you for hanging out with me and talking about the book of Matthew. We are in Matthew chapter 24, thinking about what is often regarded as a very difficult passage, that being the Olivet Discourse, the fifth of the five big speeches around which the book of Matthew is structured. Sorry about the noise here. I'm getting a bajillion texts. I'm going to mute my phone. There, that's fixed. I don't remember exactly what I was going to say. Oh, yeah, I remember. This passage, Matthew chapter 24, has been regarded by a lot of people as being incredibly difficult and overwhelming, maybe the most challenging in the entire New Testament. Not challenging like in terms of, oh gosh, it's really hard to obey what Jesus is saying there. That would maybe be in the Sermon on the Mount, the stuff about loving your enemies, but just challenging in terms of figuring out what the heck is actually going on here and what the actual answer is that Jesus is giving to the very reasonable question that the disciples are asking. And they just want to know, like, all right, we believe you. We believe that you are God in the flesh. We believe that you're the Messiah. We believe that these things you say about the future are going to happen, that history is not just meandering somewhere, but it's headed somewhere, and that God is the king of that, and that we have been invited to play a role in that. And so they're feeling a little bit of pressure, and they want some more clarity, and they very reasonably are like, so how's that going to play out? What should we be looking for? What's the timeline here? And look, we know from the other 23 chapters that we've looked at so far in Matthew that Jesus is capable of giving a crystal clear answer. This guy's a brilliant communicator. He's great at reading the room and saying things that will be understood by the people who are right there, but also anticipating how that would be read by people hundreds of years from now. This is amazing. His ability to communicate is off the charts, unrivaled in all of history, amazing. Yet, here in chapter 24, it seems like he's coming from a different angle in terms of the answer. Like he's answering it out of order. And it's almost as though he isn't trying to fully answer their question. It's almost as though he's trying to communicate something different. And before we dig in further to the specific language we're looking at here in Matthew 24:15, when Jesus says, so when you see standing in the holy place the abomination that causes desolation spoken of through the prophet Daniel, let the reader understand. Before we dig further into that, I thought it'd be good to just think for a second, like, why would Jesus not just make this answer super, super simple? And that takes my brain to a Ewan McGregor movie that came out, I don't know, in the 2000s. It's been a while now, that I really liked. I think it was Tim Burton who directed it. It has a Tim Burton feel. If it's not, it should be. And the movie was called Big Fish. It had one of those dudes who was in the Bourne Identity movies, like he was one of the Treadstone guys or something, who plays the dad. And the dad tells all of these stories about when he was a kid. And it's a very good, heartfelt story about the relationships between sons and fathers, a young man on his quest to figure out the world and live the life he needs to live, and a dad who's further along in living out that quest. So it's a good show. If you haven't seen it, you should check it out. But in the beginning of the show, the dad character harkens back to a story where they went and found the crazy cat lady neighborhood haunted witch house when they were kids. And they had said that the witch had like an eyeball that she could pop out of her head, or I might be butchering the movie. It's something like this. And if you looked into that eye, you would see how you was going to die. And nobody else had the courage to do it, but he had the courage to look into that eye. And it shaped the rest of his life. And all of the other big fish stories that come out are all kind of related to whatever confidence or perspective that this man gained from learning how he would die. And of course, as a viewer, you're supposed to sit there and run that exercise for yourself. Like, well, what if I knew how I was going to die? How would that affect things? What if it turned out that I looked in the eye and I found out I was going to die like next week? What would I do? What if I figured out I was going to live to be like 125 because science and technology is going to make us all live longer, and I've got like forever, and I thought I was at like the halfway point, and I'm actually like not even close to that. I'm still like a little baby. Like, whoa, the opportunities that are there. I mean, it's an interesting thought exercise. But if you knew beyond the shadow of a doubt, it would change how you do things, and probably not entirely for the better. Well, likewise, it feels like Jesus is doing the thing here where he's like, nah, you don't get to look into the eye. I understand why you would want to. I understand why you would want to know exactly when it's going to happen. And I understand why you would want another Cyrus-style prediction about Vladimir Putin will one day rise up to be the premier of a nation that shall be called Russia. And one day he shall rattle the saber against Crimea. And in those days, all of you shall know. And then on April 11th, whatever year, all of you should do. Like, I guess it'd be nice. But just think about the consequences for what that would have looked like over the last 2,000 years of history if we had that thing. Or think about the farce it might make things. Remember the Mayan prediction that the world was going to end in, 2012? Wasn't there a Roland Emmerich movie about that? The guy who did Moonfall, I think. He did one about that as well. The Mayan calendar, it runs out right here. Everything's going to be over. And it turned into kind of like a meme and a joke. It's just better not to know some things. And it seems like the goal of what Jesus is teaching them here, given that he starts with a whole bunch of instructions about just how the world is going to be for the long haul for you people who are following me and for the planet and life in general. It seems like if he's answering the question that way, what he's saying is, you guys need to worry more about what you do and what role you play than exactly when I'm going to be back. To put it another way, think about your relationship with your parents or maybe with your kids. I mean, the kids are always like, how much longer do we have to do this thing? And then the parents have replied, since time eternal, yeah, you're done when the thing is done. Don't worry about that. You worry about getting your work done here. You need to finish that. You need to finish that. And young lady, you also need to finish that. You know, if you put a timeline on it, it's going to change what the kids do. I just double exampled you. Thank you for your patience with me on that. In summary, I think what's happening here is that Jesus is intentionally crafting his answer so as to say what he spells out that much more clearly in Acts chapter 1. And I like to go to this moment in the Bible where this concept is communicated because it kind of comes on the heels of all the accounts of what Jesus said. And still, even though Jesus has made this clear in part throughout the Gospels, the disciples still, when Jesus is raised from the dead, and it looks like he's fixing to go back to the right hand of the Father, the disciples still in Acts 1:6 are like, but we're going to have a reckoning. Like, now, like the time, remember we were asking you about the time, you were kind of dodgy about it. Like, please, you can't leave just yet. You got to tell us the time. It's got to be now, right? Because you're still here and like, we can't do the reckoning. So it's now. Is it now? Is now the time? Is now the time when we're going to have the reckoning and you're going to restore the kingdom to Israel? And Jesus said to them, Acts 1:7, it is not for you to know the times or dates the Father has set by his own authority. And then he goes on to say, no, instead, like, you need to do this job. No, you don't worry about that. You need to get this thing done. No, this is the role you need to play right now. You let me worry about the time. I'm making Jesus sound like all like grumpy and bitter. It doesn't sound like that at all in the text. Like, the text just sounds authoritative and good. I should have probably read you the rest of the Bible passage. If you're with me here in Matthew 24 and you're like, man, this feels different than the other stuff we looked at in the other parts of Matthew. I liked the other parts better. This part feels like it gets into weird conspiracy theories and goofy end times stuff and predictions, and I don't like it. I would just say a couple of things here. One, the stuff that feels goofy and weird is because of stupid stuff that people have done with it through the centuries, where they blatantly ignore the fact that Jesus said you're not going to know the exact date or the hour, and then they're like, oh, well, but maybe I could. Like, let me just look it over one more time and make some charts and facts and figures. I think I could probably figure it out. This stuff gets screwy when people try to wring out of this rag details that Jesus is intentionally withholding because he knows that it would have the big fish effect on us and we would do weird things if we had those details. So one, don't be discouraged by this passage, because the stuff that it might remind you of that is weird is derivative of this passage in a way that is the opposite of the intent of this passage. But also don't be discouraged, because what we are supposed to be able to glean from Jesus' words in this passage, and there is stuff we're supposed to be able to get from it, is sufficient. It's there. What do we know? Well, the world is going to go on for a while from this time right here where Jesus was present, and it's going to be tough at times. And also, people who follow him have a job to do and a role to play in society. They're salt and light, just like he said at the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount. And you function as a preservative and as an ambassador, an agent of the kingdom and the values of the kingdom in this world while you draw breath in the midst of this world system. It's a huge honor and a huge responsibility and very exciting. And Jesus is steering the attention of the disciples right back to that. But also, my friends, you and I should not be discouraged by the relative complexity of this passage, because Jesus makes it clear that if there's some big thing that's a big deal and it makes sense for you to respond to an unfolding of the times in a certain way, if you're standing in the right place when that is happening, apparently it's going to be evident. There's going to be the moonfall factor there. You'll be able to see that something's going on and it makes sense to respond in some way. It looks like this is all much, much simpler than people make it. The world is going to do world stuff. There is an end to history. Some things are going to happen, most of the specifics of which seem to be withheld here, and those things that happen are going to occur at an undisclosed time. And as we'll see as we get toward the end of chapter 24, the arrival of Jesus to bring about that reckoning, that resolution to history and all of the tension we're reading about here, it's going to be super, super, super crazy evident and very grand in terms of how it is on display. So, could Jesus have made this way simpler by just laying out a timeline? On the surface, it seems like that would be simpler, but if you really think about the implications of that, I'm not sure that would be simpler. Instead, he seems to be not giving a direct answer to this direct question, because though it's reasonable to ask the question, Jesus doesn't think it's to their benefit or the benefit of the plan for them to have all of those details. If we bear that in mind, I think it becomes easier and less pressurizing for us as we continue to work through it. You are good thinkers who are incredibly well practiced at interpreting things and intuiting the social dynamics of conversation. You are great at understanding the Bible, and it is really fun to unpack this together. Don't be discouraged by the challenging parts. You got this thing. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour Podcast. Let's do this again soon.